Welcome to another episode of Christ the Center. This is our 94th installment, and joining me today, as usual, is Nick Batzig, who's church planter in Richmond Hill, Georgia. It's great to have you on, Nick.
Thanks, Kim. It's good to be on.
Our special guest today is Dr. Carl Trueman, who is professor of historical theology and church history at Westminster Theological Seminary. He's also vice president for academic affairs there. It's great to have you back, Dr. Trueman. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be back. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, today we're going to be speaking about a very interesting topic. We're going to be speaking about Martin Luther and media, talking about the changing face of media and all the different factors involved in the Reformation, and then how those can impact our understanding of what's going on today with public opinion, with the internet, all sorts of things. So we're going to dive in because it's that time of year again, coming up on Reformation Day. It's time to talk about Martin Luther and see what was going on in the Reformation. Now, Dr. Trueman, of course, when we approach this topic, probably the first thing people think about usually is the invention of the printing press. Well, what some people might not realize is the printing press apparently was invented about 77 years prior to Luther posting his 95 Theses in 1517. What was going on in the whole era of the Reformation, and what were some of the changing factors, including this printing press, that afforded for the Reformation to actually happen?
Well, the printing press was certainly, one might say, a necessary precondition for the Reformation. For the first time really in human history, you had the ability to mass produce information and transmit it in a relatively stable form across large expanses of territory. So the printing press was very important for the dissemination of ideas, and particularly of Reformation ideas. But there are a whole host of other factors also putting pressure on Europe at the time that meant the time was ripe for some kind of an explosion. There was a growing anti-clericalism. There was an increasing influence and importance of cities, a depopulation of rural areas. All of these factors contributed to the Reformation.
So it wasn't simply the printing press, as some people like to say, because they look at today and see the internet as being a huge impact, saying it's going to be even bigger than the printing press was, and they say, well, if the Reformation happened with the printing press, just think of what the church could do with the internet. But there's all sorts of factors going on back there, not simply just the printing of books, or a coalescing of all sorts of factors.
I also think that there are issues related to the differences between the printing press and the internet that are probably theologically significant. Printing press was primarily a word-based medium. Mm-hmm. The internet seems to me to be much more image-based in its impact, and that in some ways is closer to a medieval aesthetic, if you like, where images were very important, mm-hmm. as opposed to a Reformation aesthetic where it's the words that are significant and central.
Now, some of that obviously needs to be bound up with the fact that there was a shift in the liturgy and the acceptance of the vernacular in worship, wasn't there?
Yeah, well, Luther's theology really required a vernacular liturgy, as his understanding of Scripture as primarily law and gospel meant that assertions and propositions really became fairly central to what he understood as Christian piety. And to understand a command or to understand a promise, you've got to understand the language it's being expressed in. So Luther's theology required a vernacular expression. It was no longer something that happened, as to use the technical term, ex opere operato, because mm-hmm. of who the priest was. It was something that the individual needed to grasp by faith for themselves.
Dr. Trueman, was there any opposition to printing books, and with it being so new? I know they had the benefit of having the Bible, and that was the big world-changing thing that came about from the printing press. But among the Reformers and Protestants, were there any that you found that were sort of reticent to have men just be publishing things, or was it fairly welcomed across the board?
Again, it depends on who you're talking about. I think by and large, books were regarded as, what might almost say, a value-neutral thing. So all branches of Protestantism and Catholicism were happy to use the book medium to get ideas out of there. But when you look at somebody like Servetus, for example, who was famously tried and burned in Geneva in 1553, Servetus takes some years to find anybody who will actually publish or print his book, because the printers could be held accountable for the nature of what they printed and published. So a heretic, for example, did not find it easy to get his books into print. Protestants found it difficult in the 1520s to get their books into England. They were often smuggled in by merchants in the false bottom of barrels and things like that in order to get literature across hostile borders. So while Protestants and Catholics, generally speaking, were very comfortable with the idea of books in the abstract, there was a certain amount of censorship and control that went on in different geographical areas and relating to different individuals to try to restrict what was getting out in print and was available.
Now, did Luther butt up against that when he wrote his 95 Theses? I've heard that he wasn't even aware that it would take off and somebody would print it. Is that actually the case?
Yeah, when Luther nails his 95 Theses to the church door, he's essentially doing nothing on the surface more radical than sticking up an advertisement for a public debate.
Right.
I don't think he had any idea in October 1517 that the Pope wouldn't be outraged when he learned about the abuse of indulgences that was going on in Saxony and come to Luther's rescue. That it struck a chord probably surprised nobody more than it surprised Luther himself. But that's a good example, of course, of how, 100 years previously, he'd have stuck this note up on the castle door. Nobody outside of Wittenberg would have heard about it. Mm-hmm. It can be quickly grabbed, translated, printed, and distributed in a way in 1517 that it could not have been done so in 1417.
That's actually fascinating. But at the time, since Luther wasn't really a controversial figure, wasn't attempting to be one, it seems as if he wouldn't have run into those issues with censorship, but those would have come later. Did he find difficulties in getting his books published later after he had been excommunicated, or was there enough of a following for him or support for him in Germany that he didn't have much of an issue getting his books published?
He was something of a cult figure, particularly in electoral Saxony. So getting stuff published within Saxony was not a problem at all.
Right.
Not a problem at all. We know from the early 1520s, Lutheran books are arriving at Paris, are being smuggled into England. So he's becoming a European-wide figure. And it was a relatively safe exercise as a Saxon printer to print Luther's books.
But how did Luther end up becoming that cult figure? Is he just happened to be the man who struck a nerve with the anti-clericalism and other things, and then seemed to be the advocate for the disenfranchised and the poor, given some of his writings? Was it accidental that he became a celebrity in his town?
Sort of, yes. He... Sorry, my mind's gone blank there, Camden.
That's fine.
An email just came in. I shouldn't be looking at my computer. You'll be able to edit this, I presume.
I'll be able to edit after the fact. Yeah.
Would you like to repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm wondering how Luther's celebrity actually came about. Was it sort of accidental to a degree because he just happened to strike a nerve with the anti-clericalism, and some of his writings seem to have been read advocating or being an advocate for the disenfranchised and the poor. He seems kind of like this guy who just stumbled into celebrity and then ended up taking it on.
Yeah, there's a certain accidental quality to Luther's celebrity status. The genius of Luther was that wittingly or unwittingly, he managed to appeal to a wide variety of people. The language of freedom that he used certainly connected with the radical peasant politics of the time. The anti-Italian rhetoric that he used appealed to German speakers of all classes